My name is Ralph Smith, and I'm a co-founder of FedSmith.com. And I've been writing about topics on federal human resources, or personnel as it used to be called, for several decades. And one of the topics that always draws attention, not that it's popular, in fact, in a way, it's probably unpopular in many respects, uh, is the average federal salary figure. And I've labeled this presentation Big Bucks in Government. And I picked the term big bucks because it's amorphous. Nobody really knows what that means. It probably means something different to every person. Uh, but when people look at the average federal salary figure, some people will say, well, that is an unrealistic figure. It's not correct. It can't be correct because I don't make that much and I don't know anybody who makes that much in my organization. That doesn't mean that the person is wrong. And they look at it and say, well, these people making the big bucks must work elsewhere because I don't know them and I just don't think that that's accurate. The average annual salary figure is unpopular, at least as some people would say, and I'll show you some examples in a few minutes. But it's useful. It's nice to see, or it's interesting to see, how much is the government paying its employees. Throughout this presentation, what I'm going to talk about is obviously average federal salary, and then secondly, dig down a little bit into federal salary distribution. How does the government pay its employees in different agencies, and how is this average federal salary figure derived? Some of the higher paying agencies, a lot of federal employees work in one agency throughout their entire career. That's what they know. To them, that is the federal government. But there are many agencies in government. There are over 2 million employees. Some of them pay much higher salaries than others. The other thing we'll look at is SEC salary distributions. SEC stands for Securities and Exchange Commission. It is not the highest paying federal agency, but it's one of them. And I'll look at how they break down in their salary distribution and how agencies like this contribute to the overall average federal employee salary. Why do the agencies pay more, and why do the larger agencies often pay less? The average federal salary, and this is as of April 30th, 2026, is $111,181. Now, some people will look at that and say that's way too much. I don't make that much. When I actually did an article on FedSmith a couple of weeks ago, and the average federal salary at that time was just over 112,000, so it's gone down a little bit. But OPM now publishes the information about once a month, so it changes. It can go up, it can go down. Here are some comments on the federal salary average, and these are fairly common. The first time I did an article on the average federal salary, I was a little bit surprised at the reaction I got because I thought it might be popular. I thought it would be of interest. That's why I wrote the article. I was surprised at some of the emotions that seemed to come out when they see the figure. And I guess when you look at it objectively, money is an emotional topic. Somebody makes more money than I do. They're making the big bucks. I'm not making the big bucks. Why is that? Am I being treated fairly? Is this unfair? How'd the other person get the higher paying job? So these are the comments that tend to come out. I picked these from the latest article, but they're fairly typical of the articles that we see every time we do one on this particular topic. First one, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce this, but I'm going to give it a shot. Bah ha ha ha. Who makes even 70,000? Where are you getting your figures from? Well, the quick answer is the Office of Personnel Management. Now, I worked at Office of Personnel Management one time at some time in the distant past, but this is information that's available to the public, published by OPM. I didn't sit around over a glass of wine or a bottle of wine and come up with this figure because it sounded good. It's from OPM. This is hilarious. This federal employee isn't making those numbers. Let's assume the person is absolutely correct. I'm sure he knows how much he makes or doesn't make. And I guess he's saying it's hilarious perhaps because he doesn't believe it. As I said, it's not made up. That is an average figure. We'll break that down a little bit more in a few minutes. Lies. Pay is still way behind the private sector. And I think the reason articles or rather comments like this come out, Federal Salary Council every year publishes that the federal employees make roughly 20 to 30% less than what they would make in the private sector. And we see a number of comments from people that say, I could leave the government today and make 25, 30% more going into the private sector. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. There's also disadvantages in working in the private sector. And I suspect it involves, can you get a job with a larger company? Would it be a smaller company? How specialized is it? What's your educational background? What do you bring to that company that would justify the salary that they're going to pay? A lot of factors go into that. I never came remotely close to those numbers. Okay, that's probably true. I'm sure the person knows how much he makes or she makes, but that doesn't mean the average is incorrect, just that the person doesn't believe it apparently. Nothing compared to the contractors that civil service employees end up managing, especially in Washington, D.C. And clearly that is true in some cases. Some of the senior managers in the larger companies that work for the government as a contractor make big bucks, whatever that amounts to, but more than this person makes, clearly. There's also disadvantages working for a big contractor or a small contractor. I owned a contracting company. And in some cases, they find themselves working at a high salary, and then the next week they're out of a job. They lost the contract for whatever reason. That's a risk that you take. Sometimes you get paid more because of that risk. Otherwise, perhaps it's just unfair. I don't know. But that's a common comment. No, I wish. In other words, the person I think is saying, this average isn't correct. I wish I made that much. I'm an average federal employee. I don't. This figure is not correct. Those of us in the RUS, that stands for the rest of the U.S. under the locality pay system, are sure as hell behind the average, and the stars mean that there was another word that the person added that I didn't care to put in the chart because it would probably be offensive. Rest of the U.S. does make less under the locality pay system than employees who are in a locality pay area. And the number of people in locality pay areas has expanded rapidly in the last few years, especially under the Biden administration. If you're not in a locality pay area, in some cases, people were actually working at home outside the locality pay area, but they were collecting the locality pay just as if they were reporting to the office in the downtown metropolitan area where it's close, reasonably close. But I don't think Congress has taken action to prevent that, although OPM, I think, is trying to crack down on it some. But in our U.S., rest of the U.S., you do make less than in the locality pay area. That is absolutely true. If the average salary is $112,000, that means the average worker is a GS-12. Who's doing the work? So the person obviously is saying that GS-12 is a supervisor or manager supervising other people who are doing most of the work. And actually, as it turns out, he's pretty close to accurate. If you look at the salary distribution, the biggest category of people are those making $129,999 to $130,000. So I'm sorry, $130,000 to $160,000. That's the biggest category. That's roughly a GS-12 for in many cases, depending upon the where they stand in the steps for their particular grade. So that comes out to be a pretty high average. But as he points out, that's the GS-12 is the largest single category of federal employees. And that is a surprise to some people. The average pay, some higher paying agencies. A lot of people have worked in the same agency throughout their government career. In fact, it's pretty common. What they may not realize is there are a lot of smaller agencies, and some of these agencies you've probably never heard of, but they do pay more money. These are the approximate average salaries for these agencies. These are not the highest paying ones. They're some of the highest paying ones. I think the highest one in the government is the National Credit Union Administration, or NCUA. Their approximate average salary is $315,000. Obviously, that's a yearly figure. Why are these agencies paying that much more? There's a couple of reasons for it. Now, this example is SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. Now, that's a small agency. Their total employees at the time this chart was created was about 3,800 people. Now, for a lot of agencies, 3,800 people is a small percentage of a big division in that agency. This is their entire agency. But if you look at 160,000 and above, most of their employees are making over $160,000. These are all federal employees. Their salaries go into calculating that average for the entire workforce. It's a small agency. My personal opinion, 160,000 probably qualifies as big bucks. So that goes into calculating that overall average. Why the higher salary level? They're smaller agencies. They're highly specialized. In most cases, they have special pay authority from Congress. And one of the common comments or common complaints that are made by federal employees is that we're supposed to be paid roughly the same as we would get in the private sector. But that's never happened. In some cases, it clearly has happened. In these small agencies, Congress has given them special pay authority to pay higher amounts. And the reason is it's a highly specialized workforce. They have specialized mission requirements, higher educational requirements, and they're competing with the private sector positions. So the SEC, which was the example I just used, they're involved in regulating, overseeing a lot of big companies, highly specialized, high salaries. You can't regulate, you can't oversee this industry if you don't have the right people. So to get the people to work for the SEC, they pay these higher salaries. That's why their average salary is so high. They have a greater concentration of senior professional positions. A lot of the big agencies with many more employees don't have that special pay authority. They probably don't have generally that highly specialized workforce. They've got a large number of people doing less specialized work that doesn't justify the higher salaries. That's how we come to the end of this in describing what is the average federal salary and why is it so high. As I said earlier, a month ago it was over 112,000, now it's over 111,000. But working in government, you realize that something like several hundred thousand people have left. A lot of people have retired as well as left. Some went to work in private companies. Maybe they're searching for, maybe they found that they make 25 or 30% higher and they've left. But these senior people that are leaving, that are retiring, tend to be older and at the higher end of the salary scales. A lot of them left. FedSmith did an article just this week on the backlog that OPM has in processing retirement applications. That number is going down. They're processing a lot of them. So a lot of people have left and they're at the higher end of the pay scale. For that reason, at least in this 1 month period, the average federal salary went down close to about $900. That's how the system's going to work. I suspect it'll start going up again in the very near future. I appreciate you watching this video. I hope it's been useful. I hope it explains something about how this average federal salary figure comes to be. It's not me, it's not FedSmith, it's from the Office of Personnel Management that's releasing the figures. We hope that you'll continue to read the FedSmith articles. We look forward to having you watch this and similar videos, reading our articles, taking the time to submit the comments. We read the comments. We like people to communicate with us, tell us what you like, what you don't like, how we can do better, what you really like. That's helpful. Thank you very much for watching. We wish you the best of luck.